We start this hour in Europe, and peace talks aimed at ending the Ukraine war appear close to a breakthrough, but sharp differences remain. US Special Envoy for Ukraine, Kellogg, says a deal is really close, while the Kremlin insists the United States must make radical changes to its peace proposals. Kellogg says that negotiations have reached the last 10 meters, which, according to him, is the most difficult phase of any peace effort. He identified two key issues that are still not settled. One is the future of Ukraine's Donbas. The other is control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, which remains under Russian occupation. He said resolving these points could unlock a broader settlement. However, Moscow pushed back. Kremlin officials say Washington's proposals require serious and radical revisions, particularly on territorial questions. On the other hand, Ukraine has rejected any handover of territory without a referendum. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says that he had a long and substantive phone call with US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner as diplomatic efforts intensify. Joining us now is Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean of the Jindal Global Law School, joining us live from New Delhi. Professor Popovsky, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you on these issues. A huge statement today from the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, pointing out two issues. One being the control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, a huge power plant in Russian-occupied Ukraine. The other being the Donbas. These two seem like huge issues. Kellogg has described it as being 10 meters away from the finish line. Do you think that there is any hope here?
I don't think there is 10 meters from the finish line, and this is a controversial statement. On one hand, it's very close. On another hand, the two issues are very difficult, as Washington said, and what Moscow is saying, they need to have a radical changes, and they don't only limit to 2 points. Effectively nothing new. Both sides, US and Russia, are playing peacemaking, but they are not really serious here. First of all, Ukraine will not surrender. They consider to be the victim of this. This is not like a business deal to sell a land of one person to another person. This is a result of a 4 years brutal war with many civilians killed on the Ukrainian side, massive war crimes. So the treatment of Russia should be exactly like an aggressor and like war criminal, rather than just in an equal business transactional way as Americans try to achieve. And that's absolutely incompetent approach by Witkoff, who himself is a real estate agent like Donald Trump. So they have no other manner or method to solve all of this. But they are talking big talks about peacemaking, and that's not serious at all. And longer we see that going on, more agony is all of that. I have no other words to describe it. It's attempt to do something, but being incompetent to do that from the American administrations. Russians are playing games always. They love to talk about peace, and in the meantime to bomb cities and to cut the electricities, to kill civilians, and continue what they do.
And Professor Popovsky, of course, outgoing US envoy Kellogg, pointed out two sticking points, this Zaporizhzhia power plant and the Donbas region. How important are these two things to both sides?
Yes, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is a significant factor. It supplies a lot of energy. It's a big one. And that's why both sides are very willing to have that in their hand. Obviously, everything belongs to Ukraine to start with. Obviously, Ukrainians need that nuclear plant exactly for all their electricity needs, for the reconstruction of Ukraine. But for that matter, for Russia, it's also a very big appetite to ask for the same. Now, because it's on the on the battlefield, neither side cannot utilize it, and that's why for Russia it's important to keep it in its hands. But obviously for Ukrainians, that's a no-go. They will not surrender it. Donbas, yes, 80% of the territory of Donbas is in Russian hands, but the remaining 20% is significant also. By the way, including because of some resources, because of some industries, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk are large industrial cities. And again, Russia is not making advances on the battlefield. After stealing 80% of Ukrainian Donbas, they now want the peace agreement to give them the other 20%. It's like a robber who comes to your house, steals 60-70% of your furniture, and then wants signing of possession of the other 20-30% of your furniture. It's exactly like this. Absolutely no go. It's understandable. Why? Because Putin wants to report that he achieved the goals of the special military operation by capturing the 4 regions. Obviously, he cannot do that in a military way. He wants to do it in diplomatic way, but that doesn't going to work.
Yes, and Professor Popovsky, just finally, very quickly, the Donbas region, part of and Luhansk is predominantly Russian-speaking, of course. However, pre-2014 polls show that most identified as Ukrainian. Ukraine has rejected any handover of territory without a referendum. How likely do you think how do you think this referendum would go, and how likely do you think Russia would agree to such a thing?
Again, first of all, about Russian speaking, that's absolutely ridiculous. Austria is a German-speaking country entirely, 100%, and there is no point for Germany to claim any territory of Austria. By the way, half of the Ukrainian army defending its territory speaks Russian. All these brave souls, half of those brave soldiers, courageous ones that die defending Ukraine, speak Russians. So the language is absolutely no issue here. Obviously, these are Ukrainian territory, and by the way, not from 1954, when Crimea only became Ukrainians, but from the very beginning. This has always been Ukrainian territory from the beginning of the Soviet Union in 1918, when, yes, Ukrainian Soviet Republic was established after the Socialist Revolution. So there is no point to argue about Donbas and Luhansk. Even if they 100% speak Russian, doesn't make any difference. These are Ukrainian territory. And referendums will show what people want. They already suffer so much from the Russian occupation. So let's have fair and free referendums in Donbas and Luhansk and see what people say. By the way, even before the war, there was a referendum, and I think 65% of people in Donbas and Luhansk were saying that they feel Ukrainians. But even in Crimea, it was also about 50-50. So the only territory that Russia may have some desire to hold is Crimea, where the population is mixed in their attitude, in their identity, whether they're Russians or Ukrainian. The rest of Ukraine is in big majority Ukrainian.
Yes, Professor Vasily Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on these matters. We now move on. And Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rakyabov says that Russia stands shoulder to shoulder with the Venezuelan leadership and calls on the administration of US President Donald Trump to avoid escalating the situation with Caracas into a full-scale conflict. The senior diplomat noted that Moscow views the situation around Venezuela with great alarm and concern, as tensions are not easing and escalation continues. He also emphasized that Russia hopes that the Trump administration will refrain from further escalating the situation towards a full-scale conflict. This comes as Washington has conducted more than 20 strikes on boats, resulting in over 80 deaths. although the Trump administration justifies these as self-defense measures under the legal authority to target designated terrorist organizations transporting drugs into the United States. Joining us now is Mark Sutherland. He is a geopolitical commentator and he joins us live from London. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here on the programme. What are your thoughts about this announcement from Moscow asking the United States to de-escalate its activity in the Caribbean and a bit more about that relationship as well?
I just wonder whether we're going to have to look at the Cuban Missile Crisis history all over again, Thomas. The issue is to the American administration, and many people have looked at this for many years, particularly a book written in 1992, Narco-Terrorism, by Rachel Ehrenfeld. That's how far, and many years before that, have these issues been of grave concern. And of course, when you have then, as number one issue in your administration, has said, right, we need to secure our border. We are not, the fact that under the Biden administration, you and I have discussed this, with millions and millions of illegal people have then come over to the border with an open, wide border policy that Biden had. What that has brought in is deep concerns about who has actually come into the country. As there is this game going on, this extremely serious game, where people are, like Russia, want a multipolar world. They want influence. China want to be the number one hegemony in the whole world. So if you've then got an opposition to that, which is America, how can you then undermine that? And just quickly, drugs are a profoundly serious problem, and they are taking the means to deal with that. Whether you agree or not, I understand, but other people may not. That I understand that when they turn around and say, what proof have they got? Well, the other issue is, when you go up to Canada and you look at Vancouver and you look at the open policy on drugs in whatever way, you can take whatever you want on the streets and the effects on humanity, all you can do is basically be extremely sad and upset by what you then see. There has been many issues of young people being affected by drugs, fentanyl, etc., that is coming over the border, and the administration is saying no. There is also geopolitics that is going on because Maduro, socialism, and that is then playing out here, which again we need far more time to discuss. Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, just Mark, very quickly as well. Of course, we have had the USS Gerald Ford posted up in the Caribbean, the biggest aircraft carrier in the world. We've also seen these extremely controversial strikes on these drug boats that have left over 80 people dead. From your view, how close are we to that threshold of what Russia has called a possible full-scale conflict here?
Well, it's the last thing that we want. Well, we want, but also understandably, America is flexing its muscles. If they do that, then it's understandable that the Russian propaganda machine then comes in full bore because of their relationships, because of the relationships that they have in that area. And the other thing is, to some people's ears, that may be uncomfortable to say, hence my referencing that book, is then in recent times, when you look at then Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations and how they then raise money, and hence the word narco-terrorism, hence the word that is how they then raise money, and so do other organizations in that theater, in that arena, in that part of the world. And this is what it maybe is not talked about, vocalized in a big way. But this also comes into the mix. If you feel that your country, what you stand for, is being threatened by the huge amounts of drugs coming through, then that needs to be addressed. Now, before someone then throws the name Oliver North at me and Iran-Contra, I hear you loudly, because sometimes it can work both ways. That's not a popular thing then to say. But now the administration under the President Trump is is wishing to deal with this. And I understand it when people say we don't like the way this is being done because we then need proof. When, just quickly, when these boats are going out, is looking at who they are linked to, how they are armed, and it is then an army that then takes this seriously. Same with Mexican cartels. You're not just dealing with mafia; you are dealing with full-blown militias, army, and how they are then armed to the teeth. So it's one army fighting another. This is what's not discussed, but these are all these issues that need to be discussed in regard to this subject, in my humble opinion. Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for joining us as always. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on and over